Okay, we're going to watch an interview with Richard Dawkins. He's a famous atheist. He's going to be asked, is he an atheist? We're going to listen to his response, and then we're going to give some commentary. All right, here we go.
Are you an atheist?
For all practical purposes, yes. Nobody can actually say for certain that anything doesn't exist. But I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an a-leprechaunist and an a-fairyist and an a-pink unicornist.
So you're not 100% sure God doesn't exist, but you're sure enough to make it practically...
I'm as sure as you are sure that fairies and leprechauns don't exist.
Okay, let's just stop right there for a second. He is correct in saying that you can't be 100% certain that a thing does not exist. There always could be unknowns, and those unknown things could actually prove the thing's existence. So he is correct in saying that. The problem here is that we don't live life that way. We don't live life with 100% certainty in basically any category. I mean, maybe the laws of physics or something like that. But like when we get in a car, we're not 100% certain that we're going to make it there without having a wreck. We take inference that we are a pretty good driver and we've got a history of not having wrecks and we're probably going to make it there okay. And so we try to get to beyond a reasonable doubt. And we do that with all areas of our life. For example, we don't go into a restaurant with a chemical test kit, testing our food before we eat it to see if there's poison in it. We use inference. Again, we've had a history of going to this restaurant possibly in the past and have not been poisoned, and other people haven't been poisoned as well. So we can get to beyond a reasonable doubt that we can eat here and be pretty safe in doing it. Let's see what else he has to say.
And do you see an equivalence between the idea of God and the idea of a fairy and a leprechaun?
The evidence for both is equally poor.
Okay, now that's just crazy. He's saying the evidence for both is equally poor. I'm sorry, but he's either unaware of the evidence or he's simply choosing to ignore it. And being that he's a very famous atheist, I am going to go with the latter, that he's simply choosing to ignore it. Because the facts say otherwise. There are lots of ways that we could show that something like God must exist. There are three main arguments, though, that sort of do that for us. Okay, so let's just go through those. Number one, we have the cosmological argument, okay? And so what it says is that everything that had a beginning has a cause. The universe had a beginning. We call that the Big Bang. Therefore, the universe had a cause. And why do we say that? Well, if you look at the laws of general relativity that Einstein came up with, it shows that space, time, and matter are correlative, meaning that they came into existence together and at the same time. So whatever created space, time, and matter must by definition be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Okay, and then to choose to create must be personal because a rock doesn't choose anything. And to create with such fine-tuning must be incredibly intelligent, and then to create from nothing must be incredibly powerful. So just looking at that, we can get to, there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, very powerful, very intelligent, personal force that created the universe. Now that doesn't get us all the way to the God of the Bible, but that's exactly how the Bible describes God. And that's what we mean by God, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial being that's created everything. Now, the second argument is called the teleological argument. This is basically an argument from design. This looks at creation and the intricacies of what it takes to make creation, and it gets to the idea that something with a mind had to create it. Okay, take, for example, DNA. There are over 3 billion letters inside DNA that basically equate to a programming language that builds you. It instructs every cell what to do and what type of cell to be and how to operate. Now, if we were to just see a simple message on the beach, Joe loves Sally, we instinctively know that's a message. That came from a mind, from a person, and yet it's a very short message. So just imagine if we saw the same thing, but 3 billion letters long. How much more of a mind must that have come from? It's inescapable. It's a programming language. It must have come from a person. Only a person can create information. Only a mind can create information. But then if we look at the physical fine-tuning of the universe, there's many, many numbers that we could go over that show fine-tuning to an incredible degree. Okay, let's just take some constants that we deal with in physics. The gravitational constant, fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 60th. If that was one notch more or less in either direction, the universe would have either collapsed back in on itself or expanded too quickly and not allowed matter to come together to form planets and stars and galaxies. Either way, no life in the universe. Take the expansion rate of the universe, fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 120th power, an unimaginable number. And again, like the gravitational constant, if that was different in even the slightest degree in either direction, we would have no life. And then take the mass and energy distribution of the universe, an incomprehensible number, fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. We can't even begin to comprehend that number. And yet that is required again for life to exist in the universe. And all these numbers are relative to each other. If one changes, you would need to change another one. So, and this is just 3 that I've mentioned out of many that we could go over. So all these numbers fine-tuned to incomprehensible levels and yet all relative to each other. It just leads people, astronomers and the like, to say things like this. Here's a quote from Robert Jastrow, who's a famous astronomer. He said, "Astronomers now find they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds to every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact." That's what an astronomer said looking at the data. Why does he say supernatural? Because again, space-time and material can't create themselves, so what created space-time and material must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, or in other words, not within nature, or supernatural. Now, the third argument is called the moral argument, and it basically says if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not and cannot exist. But yet we do have objective moral values. Therefore, God exists. And this plays off of the idea that we all instinctively know certain rights and wrongs, like murder is always wrong. Okay, why is it that we know this? God has to be the moral lawmaker of the universe. If God does not exist, then there is no objective morality outside of people. It's just people deciding what they like and don't like. And if that's the case, then the next problem is how do we decide who gets to create the laws, right? Because it would just be one person's preference over another's. And so without God, there cannot be any objective moral values. And I think all this can be summed up pretty succinctly if we look here in Romans. I'm in Romans 1, chapter 1, verse 19. It says this: "They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky." In other words, creation. "Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God." So in summary, Richard Dawkins knows there's a creator. It's an inescapable fact. He's choosing to ignore that fact. Thanks for listening. We'll have more later.